Hello, my dude and my dudette. I hope you guys are doing well. So last night we talked about Genesis 3, and I believe I started to talk about Joseph, and then we put a pin in that idea. Um, Last night, for some reason, I was trying to take a bunch of rabbit trails and had to really hone in what I wanted to say. But I'll talk a little bit about Joseph tonight. Um, he pretty much closes out the book of Genesis. We see was he was a good dude. Um, he was a righteous man, and his brothers were very, very envious of him. Which, by the way, if Vivian, I don't know if you remember, we used to watch Veggie Tales. There was an episode, I think it was called The Ballad of Little Joe, and then there was a little song in there that you always thought was funny, and you'd sing it. Oh, little Joe. I can't get that song out of my head. It's stuck there forever. Um, but his brothers, there's a whole lot that goes on there, and you can read that. Um, but the point I want to make is his brothers treated him very unjustly, very unjustly. Um, you guys may have arguments every now and then, and you may raise your voice at each other, and you might bicker, but um, you two have never had a situation like Joseph had with his brothers, where they threw him in a ditch, and then they sold him into slavery, and then told the father that he had been killed. And he was sold into slavery, and things were okay for him for a while. But then he was, long story short, ended up in prison for several years. And then he eventually, from there, he became the second in command, the second most powerful person in Egypt. So from the lowest of the low to, about as high of a position as you can get. And eventually ran into his brothers. There was a famine, and as he was serving in Egypt, his brothers came because there was a drought or excuse me, there was a famine in their land as well. And Joseph recognized them; they didn't recognize Joseph. Um, but again, to sum this up and get to a certain point here that I'm trying to make, he forgave his brothers for what they did to him. And after their father passed away, the brothers were very, very scared because they thought, okay, he kept us alive because of our father, but now that he's gone, he's really going to let us have it. Um, but Joseph gave that famous line that really, if I wouldn't say I would use this one verse to sum up the entire Bible, but it is certainly one of the prominent themes that Joseph tells them, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. That his brothers were envious, and they wanted to just get rid of him. They only had evil intentions in their heart, but God, being in control of the entire universe, he allowed this suffering to come into Joseph's life for a little while, and eventually exalted him to a position where he could benefit so many people, more so than if he had stayed in the land with his brothers there. Um, and so when we look at the life of Jesus, um, especially what happened to him on the cross, there were evil intentions there. Certainly, Satan, you know, being behind the scenes, and the people who crucified Jesus, the ones that conspired to kill him, like Judas, one of the 12 disciples, betrayed him. The religious leaders handing him over to the Roman government to be crucified. There were nothing but evil intentions there. But what Joseph said to his brothers, it could also be said about Jesus being crucified on the cross. What they meant for evil, what man meant for evil, God meant for good. God intended it for good. for the good of the entire human race, because without the cross of Christ, without the atonement of sins, there's no salvation for any of us. So we can be forgiven of those sins. So in that we see Joseph pointing us to Jesus. Joseph was a righteous man. He didn't deserve the punishment that was given to him. But yeah, I mean, it was ultimately for Joseph's good and for God's glory, and that's true of the suffering that happens in our lives. Bad things happen to us. There are times where people do mean and nasty things to Christians. You may get picked on. There have been Christians who were killed very brutally for their faith. But any bad thing that happens, if you're in Christ, it shouldn't be a waste, because He's using that to grow us, to make us more like Jesus. He's using that to make us more dependent on Him, because when those bad things happen, we pray and we run to God. We should. But it also brings Him glory, because when He delivers us out of those things, we're going to worship Him and we're going to have a closer relationship to Him.